So it has been about a week now since Avengers Endgame got released. The tears have stopped flowing, mostly. So this is an official spoiler warning for Avengers Endgame. If you have not seen the film or do not care about spoilers, feel free to stay. If you have not yet seen the film, what is wrong with you? This is the cinematic event of the decade. We thought Avengers was going to be the groundbreaking film of our generation. That was just the appetizer. This is the real deal. This is not a drill. This is the final part of what everything in Avengers was leading up to. So last warning for spoilers. This is a complete spoiler rundown for the film. Here we go. Let's get into it. So Avengers Endgame pretty much picks up almost exactly where Infinity War left off. There's almost no passage of time between the two films, which basically shows that these are two films that are kind of one really long cinematic event. These are really meant to be watched back to back. And as we saw in the post-credits scene of Captain Marvel, she comes back to Earth after the little pager that she gave Nick Fury stops going off and she arrives on Earth. They obviously inform her in that post-credits scene that they have some friends who are still out in space. They're probably stranded. And the film basically picks up with Hawkeye losing his family in the snap, and that starts off his story for this film. And then we cut to Tony Stark and Nebula trapped on the Guardians of the Galaxy ship in space. They've run out of fuel. They are basically drifting through space, and they have not much time left. They've been up there for probably about a month at this point. So once Captain Marvel goes up to space and rescues Tony Stark and Nebula and the ship from drifting around in space, brings them back to Earth, they all kind of regroup and they work out a plan to try and track down Thanos, find out where he is, and somehow reverse the snap. They find out what planet he's on because they get the same signature from the stones that they did while he was on Earth. So they go and find him, they try to ambush him to get him to reverse the snap. But it's too late, and Thanos has already used the stones to completely destroy the stones. They are no more. It is irreversible what he has done. For this, Thor just kind of casually cuts his head off, as you want him to do, and that's kind of everything that happens right before even the title sequence of this film. And then it skips to 5 years later, and there's this kind of sinking feeling that you get where you kind of go, okay, everyone in this world is having to live with the effects of what Thanos has done and kind of come to terms with that and move on in a way in this new world order. At which point, thanks to the actions of one particularly lucky rat, Ant-Man comes back from the quantum realm that he got trapped in at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. For him, it's been about 5 hours in the quantum realm, but here it's been 5 years. So he goes to catch up with the rest of the Avengers, and he puts forward this theory that perhaps because of this weird passage of time that he experienced while in the quantum realm, they can potentially use this for time travel. And so Ant-Man and now Professor Hulk, who is a combination of Bruce Banner's mind and Hulk's body, and all of the rest of the Avengers put together this plan to do a time heist, to go and get all of the Infinity Stones from their points previously in time before Thanos could get to them and use them himself, and then bring them back to the present to use them to reset everything that Thanos did. In fact, there's one beautiful reference from Ant-Man where he kind of suggests that everything Back to the Future taught him is not correct, which in this instance stands to reason. However, Thanos finds out about this when, in the past, in 2014, there are 2 nebulas at the same time, and their weird kind of cybernetic mainframe kind of talks to one another, and he finds out about the entire plan follows them back through the wormholes that they create in the quantum realm to our present after they bring back the stones, and then that results in the greatest superhero on-screen battle ever in history. It is phenomenal. But we are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there, so let's kind of break down this film part for part. So firstly, as I said in my spoiler-free review, Joe and Anthony Russo only released 8 minutes of the film for people to cut trailers out of. Now this was very clever because everything that you see in the trailers is basically mostly from about the first half an hour of the film. There is so much film in here that you do not even get a glimpse of in the trailers. This was so cleverly marketed. Now, as I've said before, the rules of time travel in Endgame are a little bit skewed from what we already know from previous film franchises that use time travel, so it's a little bit different from what they do in here, but the explanation they give does justify it in a certain amount of reasonability. So it's obviously used to meet their own ends, and it's a little bit convenient, but it is justified and it does make sense, because if they don't put them back, that is what will create a completely alternative timeline where those Infinity Stones don't even exist, and the reason for them going back to get them won't happen. So they need to go and put them back in their place so that the events occur for them to first of all go back and get them from the past. Although at one point they go back to 2012 to the Battle of New York, and Loki actually manages to get his hands on the Tesseract at one point and just spaces out of there, which means that Cap and Tony have to go even further back in time to the 70s in order to get the Space Stone for themselves. Now that does confuse me a little bit, because if they go even further back to get the Tesseract, does that still mean that their previous events of when they messed up and Loki got the Space Stone back still happened, or does that actually mean that because they went back further, that negated that action because they may as well have not been there at all? Or is it that all of the events still happened and Loki still got his hands on the Tesseract, but somehow still managed to find his way back to 2012, and the events that are going to be in between him spacing out of there and coming back so that all of those events can still happen is what's going to be his series that he has coming out later this year. Oh god, my head hurts, someone bring me a crisp sandwich. I'll tell you one person who does know. Kevin Feige, and he's staying pretty quiet about it. I'm relatively certain that in our current canon present that we now know at the end of Endgame, I am fairly certain Loki is still dead. But it does open it up for other potential Loki adventures, which I personally am very excited to see. Now what I will say is that during Endgame, not just at the end of the film in the last third, but points leading up to that, had a lot of emotional weight to them. There were some genuinely heartfelt moments that I, for one, reacted to, and it actually showed my level of investment in subtle aspects of characters throughout this entire franchise that I didn't really realize before. There's actually a father-son moment between Howard Stark and Tony Stark that happens that you kind of realize, yeah, Tony Stark does actually miss his father. Like, he never got a real chance to kind of say goodbye to his dad. And he kind of gets a little bit of that opportunity in this film. Thor also gets to finally say goodbye to his mother on Asgard when he goes back in time. And can we just take a second to sidebar to quickly discuss Big Lebowski Tubby Thor? Because that was absolutely hilarious. In a way, I hope it doesn't stay that way. I hope it's just for this film, that he's kind of had a little bit of a breakdown, let himself go, obviously can't process the beer carbs anymore. But to see that side of Thor really did make me laugh a little bit. And sure, it does make him look a little bit more Viking-like and a little bit more Norse, because he's got a little bit more chunk to him, particularly when he transforms and he's got the beard braid and everything, so that was cool. But seriously, Thor is meant to kind of be godlike, so I hope that he kind of decides to just, you know, cut out the carbs, slim down again, get that muscle back on. And obviously, at the same time, my main man, Korg, still in the game. Absolutely love it. And then obviously there's Clint and Natasha, who are both fighting with each other to see who's going to sacrifice themselves in order to get the Soul Stone. Ultimately, Black Widow sacrifices herself. She has less to gain from everything being reset, and Hawkeye has a whole family that he will potentially get back if this plan goes right. And obviously, the Soul Stone trade is permanent. Like, you can't then take back the Soul Stone and get a refund and get that person back. That's not exactly the way that it works. I'm afraid all purchases are final. So clearly, at this point, unfortunately, Black Widow is just as dead as OG Gamora. So eventually, they manage to bring back all of the stones that they've collected from different points in time back to our present, which still means that our canon past is still the past, because those events still happened and they've brought them back to after that point. And they still will have happened if they put those stones back again afterwards. And then Thanos uses what he now knows from our present Nebula, going back in time and using the same computer mainframe as past Nebula to come back to our present and try to get the stones back. But not before Professor Hulk manages to put on a new gauntlet that is made entirely out of Stark tech, and then re-snap everything back to the way it was without changing the past events, just bringing everyone back, nothing else. And because Thanos has followed us back through, he comes down with his ship and he just blows the Avengers facility to complete bits and leaves our heroes just there having to face him alone, except right at the crucial point, everyone comes back, and you remember, oh yeah, they snapped him back. Everyone is back now, and everyone comes through portals to join the fight. And I mean everyone. Anyone with even a remote amount of powers that has been in the MCU up until this point is there in one place, united, all together, ready to face off against Thanos and all of his armies and everything like that. And it is the biggest superhero throwdown you have ever seen. The fight that follows is basically what everyone had been hoping for the longest time. It has everything. It has Giant Man stomping on people. It's got Star-Lord, Falcon, and War Machine all flying together. It's got an emotional reunion between Spider-Man and Tony Stark, and he says, I must have blacked out or something, but then the wizard guy told me it had been 5 years, so I'm back now, I'm here to help. Captain Marvel even comes in right at the last minute and just starts to tear stuff up. It is the ultimate in wish fulfillment for any Marvel comic book fan or anyone that is even remotely invested in the MCU at this point. And the biggest thing of all is that while Tony Stark, Thor, Captain America are all fighting Thanos, he's beating them back, standing his ground, he nails Thor down, and he's going in, he's kind of pushing down, and you see Mjolnir start to move, because Thor brought that back with him, so he's got Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, and you see Mjolnir start to move and lift up, and you think, yes, Thor's gonna catch it, and he's gonna start beating back Thanos with original Mjolnir, and it bashes him in the head, and then it flies back, and sure, Cap just catches Mjolnir. Cap has now become fully worthy of lifting Mjolnir, and it is the single greatest "what the hell am I seeing here" moment in the entire MCU history. It's such a surprise, and Cap is just absolutely slaying it. If there was one thing I ever believed about Captain America, it's that he was always worthy. Ultimately, the fight comes down to Tony Stark and Thanos, and they're throwing down, and Thanos manages to get the new gauntlet back onto his hand. He goes to make a snap, and nothing happens. And then you see Tony Stark, who has really sneakily lifted the Infinity Stones out of that new gauntlet into his own Iron Man armor, and he just snaps Thanos and his armies all away. Thanos turns to dust, but ultimately Tony Stark is just a guy. He's a guy in a suit. He's a genius, and he knew that he had to do it because he said to Doctor Strange, "Is this the one eventuality that you saw where we win?" And Doctor Strange said, "If I tell you what happens, it doesn't happen." So Tony Stark just had to act on instinct. He couldn't tell him that Tony Stark has to sacrifice himself, because if he did, Tony Stark he'd stop. He would hesitate. He might not want to do it. Tony Stark had to do it on instinct, and ultimately it's a sacrifice that means Tony Stark dies because of the immense power that it takes to snap everything like that completely away. And you kind of get this moment of him sitting there, he's completely done in, and he has nothing else to give, and the arc reactor on his chest kind of powers down. Of course it had to be Iron Man. Like, there's no way that this film could not end with Iron Man doing something like that. It makes so much sense. It had to be Iron Man. Iron Man is what started this entire franchise. Tony Stark is the alpha and omega of this entire run of Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's what began it all. That's what ends it all. And the funeral scene that he gets at the end is so touching, because you realise there are all of these people that Tony Stark has kind of had an effect on the life of, that are there, that you kind of forget how many people Tony Stark has had that effect on. And I'm going to try and get through this next part without welling up too much, but it does fall to Steve Rogers to go back in time to put all of the Infinity Stones back where they got them from. And they go to bring him back to the present time, and nothing happens. And they turn around and they see an old man just sat on a bench nearby, and you realise that it's Steve Rogers, and he's gone back, and after he put all of the Infinity Stones back and did his job, he just decided to live a life. He was a man out of time. He never got to be in the time that he grew up in. He was suddenly flung into a place where he didn't belong, and now he's gone back and he's lived his life, and he went back and had that relationship with Peggy Carter that he always wanted to do. And to be honest, that was everything I hoped for the ending of Captain America as a character. I was mentally prepared for Captain America to die in this film. Like, I had prepared myself for that eventuality. What I wanted was exactly what happened, and it was the perfect send-off for his character. It was so emotional and so right. And you realise at the end of the film that it doesn't need any post-credit scene. It doesn't need setup for anything else. It doesn't need to tease you into something to bring you back for the next film or anything like that. This is the end. Obviously, they are going to do more. I am excited about all of the other things that they are going to do. But if they didn't, this is how the franchise would end, and I would be okay with that. I would also like to point out that when Thor leaves New Asgard and goes off with the Guardians of the Galaxy, I totally called that after Thor Ragnarok, where I was like, well, the Asgardians are traveling through space. The Guardians of the Galaxy are traveling through space. Maybe what they should do is join together to be the Asgardians of the Galaxy. And I have seen a bunch of theories after this film that kind of suggest ways that Tony Stark could come back, because he might have left an AI of himself that can operate Iron Man armor as like a hologram. And that Cap could probably come back because he has to mentor Falcon in being the new Captain America. As for the next stages of the MCU, I don't necessarily see that really going forward too much, as I think these characters have kind of lived out their story arc. They've had that send-off. There's no need for them to do anything else to them because their send-off was so perfect. The future of the MCU is a little bit sketchy. I'm not entirely sure what other films they have planned other than more Spider-Man, more Doctor Strange, more Guardians of the Galaxy, and more Black Panther, and of course the Eternals. There was one Easter egg where someone mentioned at the start of the film that there was an earthquake underwater. That kind of does lead me to believe they may introduce Namor the Submariner at some point. I don't know how much that's going to pan out. And that about does it for my spoiler review of Avengers Endgame. Basically, I loved everything in this film from start to finish. I thought Infinity War was fantastic. I had no idea how they were going to top Infinity War, but there you go. It's the most perfect send-off to some characters, rounding off this phase of 22 films of the MCU in perfect fashion. But Avengers Endgame, have you seen it? What did you think about it? What are you excited to see from the next lot of MCU films? And big question, what part made you cry the most in Avengers Endgame? Come on, admit it, you definitely did. All comments now are welcome in the comments section below. We can talk spoilery nerdy. As always, if you have enjoyed what you've seen here and you would like to see more, you can click right here to subscribe and see some more funky fresh videos from yours truly. And until that point, that's not just any ass. That's America's ass.